top tips for running, I put in brackets successful process workshops, because I do believe anyone can run a workshop of any kind of type. But I think you'd all agree, we're all striving for them to be a success, whatever that might mean for your project. So I've kind of tried to group them in a few different areas, and just to make sure you stay till the end, or at least entice you to the end, some of my favourites, and those that know me will probably be able to guess a couple of them, I'm sure. But yeah, keep you guessing as we go through. This is not the first time we've done this as a drop-in session. I'm pretty sure Craig's done it not too long ago, and he took the approach of looking at the process for the workshop, and splitting it out that way. I'm taking a different tact. I'm not using a process. I am just going to say before, during, and after. The workshop. What are the top 10 things we should be looking at? And as always, we can share the content. I'm pretty sure I was reminded to record it, so it should be shared on our YouTube channel, where you can find the vast majority of our videos. So in terms of before, so disclaimer, this isn't going to be holistic. This is my experience. I've been running workshops for God crikey, I'm not even going to say quite a few years. I love running workshops. Bit of admission there. I think they're great. It's a bit addictive if you get it right, and I'm lucky that the vast majority of mine have been successful. Very rarely have I had what I would call an unsuccessful or a bad workshop, and even those bad ones, you get experience and the lessons. So in no particular order, but before the workshop, I think it's very important to set the right expectations. And a lot of it comes down to the why. I know we talk about processes and the why, but actually, why are we running workshops? You as part of the project team running workshops, you might be very close to that, but you're bringing in all sorts of people into a series of process workshops, helping them to understand why we're looking at it. Who's involved, why them, and of course, just setting expectations of when, how long. It's all stuff which you might take for granted, but people are coming into it blind, or they've been invited to workshops in the past, and they might have completely different expectations of what to expect and what you're going to teach them through. So really focus on setting that right expectations, and also what happens next. So before, do this before. What happens after the workshop? Really important. To sort of guide people, handhold people into that. Agreed in roles, it's quite an obvious thing to do, baby, but I also like to make sure we don't just look at the obvious ones. So again, not holistic, but actually putting someone in charge of if you've got the team, if you're running it yourself, obviously you'll be wearing all these hats, but actually giving people different tasks about owning the parking lot, making sure we're keeping to time, and we're to breaks as well, in that. Having a scope enforcer, I always like to put one of my colleagues in charge of keeping me on track, so you don't go sort of completely off piste, down a rabbit warren, and you can also have good cop, bad cop. You can have someone that's will stop conversations if they're not the right conversations to do, protecting you as the facilitator, maybe being seen as the nicer. So again, it's quite interesting, and this is something you learn as the team, as the project will evolve. Defining the data to be captured beyond the process. We call a process, it's the boxes and lines, it's the inputs, outputs, it's the who's doing it, what systems. And this will go back to the why are we process mapping, but actually defining, again, what it is you're going to be capturing for the session makes the session go a lot easier. It's not to say you can't capture something that isn't predefined, but again, it will make it a lot easier. My strong advice here is to try and keep it as simple as possible. So don't try and run massive workshops where you're trying to capture anything and everything. People will get very fatigued very quickly. You'll get very fatigued very quickly. So really, decide what it is you're capturing, prioritize, and then go through that. Always define the process first. But if it's about improvement opportunities or understanding how long stuff's taking, if you need both of those, which is more important, because you might run out of time, or people might run out of energy. Also, before again, a lot of these areas we could talk for quite a while, but you can kind of see the question there about blank screen or start of a 10. A lot of companies will have a process that exists or has existed perhaps. So you've got what you can do before is you can translate that into Skore if you're using Skore, or the process workshop tool that you're using. I'd like to think it is Skore, as a start of a 10. That has massive pros. It can also have perceived cons. You're trying to fit someone else's thinking into what was maybe documented a year, 18 months ago. So you've got to show some contextual thinking around that. And then again, before the workshop, make sure you check the basics. Yeah, again, depends if it's in person, but if you're using projectors, have you got a room? Is it big enough? All that stuff which people assume is going to work. Just plug your laptop in. Try and get access before if it's a room. If you're going to do it over something like Teams or Zooms, does everyone have access to it? Yeah, especially if you're coming in from an outside company. So again, just these simple tips a lot of the time, but it's worth doing even if it's just for your own confidence. So then during, when it gets a bit more exciting, perhaps I've started off with the expectations thing again. I'm a big fan of not just setting expectations, but making sure you communicate them and then communicate them again and keep people informed. Yeah, so you might have invited people. There might be a bit of time before. So at the beginning of that session, make sure you review what is it doing? Why are we here? Back to the back to what you set, the reason for the workshops in the first place, and define ground rules. I know we're all adults. Actually asking people for their attention. If they need to take calls, great, but outside the room, whatever you decide is your housekeeping and your ground rules. Make sure people understand that's what you're expecting. And then another tip, especially I'm assuming it's like a project which will involve many workshops. Have 2 versions of your intro. So have a really, keep both short and sweet because you want to get into the meat of the workshop. But have one where it's for people that wouldn't have had a workshop with you before. Have one, so it might have a little more background to the project and why we're here, and then have one which is for repeat offenders, for people that are coming back and doing one or more workshops, going over some of the basics, always going over the why are we here, what is it trying to do, and some of the ground rules. That's always a good thing to have. And that stick to the 5 steps. 5 steps to the perfect process. A lot of you have seen one of our drop-ins, and if you've been through our training, it really is everyone's friend. I say everyone's friend because as a facilitator, using the 5 steps as that handrail is so beneficial, and it helps you help your attendees to the workshop where you set out the scope, then activities. I'm not going to go into the details of the 5 steps now. That's a complete different session, but it really is like whenever I've been dragged away from that approach, I've always regretted it. And so you can say hidden in the 5 steps and as part of UPM as well is mapping one level at a time. The other guidance is assume it works. Map that happy flow. Then you can come back and do the exceptions. You always get someone that say, "Oh, we've got 20 different versions of our sales process. It depends on product." Fine. That's fine. Let's pick one. What's the most pertinent? What's the most common? Whichever it is, pick one, and then go back and look at the other 19. And I will put money on it that you will not have 20 variations of a process. You'll have subtleties maybe to 1 or 2 versions of a process. And also, I put it in here as admit defeat, and it's kind of come into the next session. I put it into the kind of making use of the parking lot. If something's obviously out of scope, or it's a bigger discussion, or you don't have the right people in a room, or there's a key decision that's being made outside this workshop or as part of the business, don't crack on. Don't force it. If you might have booked a 2-hour session, but if there's one of these blockers in the way, it's better to regroup, come back, give people time back, or maybe focus on something else. People think we've got 2 hours workshops, we're going to use that 2 hours. Actually, be very cognizant of that. And then again, you're in the session. Make sure you're managing the room as a facilitator running the workshop. Things to watch out for, in my experience, is the quiet person. You'll always get the chatty person that's might want to dominate, but you as a facilitator taking the time and finding out ways to get the quiet person to speak, there'll be gold in there. And it gets them engaged, and they'll have some really good input in there. So it's about that. Keep an eye out for energy levels. Again, back to my point. Don't flog a dead horse. Don't admit defeat, especially on the post-lunch sessions. If change it up, yeah, or try and do something if the energy levels are, or take a break, yeah, take a 5-minute break in that thing. Also, when you're running workshops, something I told a lot of people, it's a subtle one, but use their language. Hugely important. If you back to my previous point, if you've already got like a starter for 10 in there, which might be previous process you've translated, or it might be an industry standard, you changing it for their language is so powerful. Yeah, it's such a good way of engaging people. So can't think of a great example off the top of my head, but you'll get that engagement on another level. So change processes that are there, to their language, because you get this sense of ownership. And then think out on other things to watch out for are mapping the perfect process. You can get bogged down with trying to map the perfect process. Let people map the wrong process. If you're mapping an as is, especially map it how it is. That's fine. You'll get slowed down if you try and map the perfect process. And practice in terms of doing workshops. So in terms of after, I've kind of added this in here. I know you'll be doing this in the session, but I'm sort of drawing the line of after the workshop, after you've captured your content, after you think you've got everything in there. Make sure you've got time to while you've got people in the room to step through the process. It's a real way of just coming down and just sort of and just making sure you've understood everything. It's one last chance to plug any gaps or highlight any more actions that might be there. Make sure you assign any actions at the end of a session. Once people leave, it's very hard to pin people down, even if it's just a catch-all. Right, we're going to ask Colin to go away and work out who the action owners are, but make sure someone's got ownership of the actions in that parking lot. Always talk about, even though we've spoken about it at the beginning and before, what happens next. And if you're adding them into Skore, which I would hope you would be, so that they can start adding comments to your processes or print them out or whatever they might be doing, show them. Quick 2-minute demo. This is what we're expecting. Again, it's just setting that expectations. Make sure you thank everyone as well, because most people coming to workshops, they're important people. They've got jobs to do. So really, and the chances are you want some more of their time. So make sure they feel special in that sense. And then make sure you tidy up and share. And the key takeaway here is timing is key. I always tell people workshops have a very short half-life. So going back to someone that day or the very next day with thanks for your time, here's the process, please go and comment, here's the actions, you'll get a lot more reaction and positivity than if you leave it a week or 2, 3 days, 4 days. People are busy and the like. So really big tip there is try and catch people while it's warm in there. And also a workshop's just one way of capturing it, and it's a good way of getting a good the bulk of it done. But is there anyone else that would add value? Ask the attendees, after or in the session, invite them in to share the content. Invite them to comment and view and the like, because it's very easy for groups of people to go down one path and miss something that might be actually obvious to someone else. So the more you share the output, the better it's going to be in that sense. And then close out any loose ends. So do what you said. So plan up any follow-up sessions that you might have. I love the term, used it many times over the years, but you run guerrilla workshops. So you might have identified a few different gaps. You might not need an hour. You might need half an hour. So sitting down with people on an ad hoc basis after that to plug those gaps is a really useful a way of following up after workshops as well. You can, because again, if you've done it right, you've got some really good processes and a framework. You can have some really focused discussions. We've got this open question on this point here, or we just need a little bit of detail on this box here. How can you help us? And keep communicating as well after the workshops. Again, it's about, you set expectations, what's going in the project. People have come into your workshops, they've invested time, even if it's part of a bigger program. Make sure they realise the value it's brought or how it's affected. Or it sounds obvious, but a lot of people are so focused on the next step in a project that they forget to go back to people and re-engage or keep them up to date. So communication is a massive part of after a workshop. And then my favourite tips, again in no particular order, I think I might have some duplication, is if you're mapping processes, and a lot of our customers are as part of a wider project, or a set of workshops, process workshops, map out the process. Yeah, drink your own champagne. You might be surprised of where the ownership lies in certain tasks or who you might need to involve, and that's something you can also share in terms of the expectation setting as well. So map out a process for you. What is it we're doing before? Who is going to translate a process if one exists? Who's going to own the actions? What are we expecting from SMEs? All that sort of stuff. It's a really good. Doesn't have to be overcomplicated, but it's a really good tool just to get the project team in there. Defining a purpose is key for each process, and I've often put that on the screen. Yeah, if we've known it before, brilliant. Put it up on the screen, get people to comment or check. If it's not, spend a few minutes just putting 1 or 2 sentences up about what this process is for. Yeah, and it's a really good aid when people start going off on a tangent. Because you can go back to the top of the process if you've got drill downs. Go back to the top of the process and say, just to remind people, we're here because of this. Yeah, the reason is this. It's just a handrail for you as a facilitator to go back. You'll remember at the beginning of the session, we said we would focus on ABC. Why don't we park X, Y, Z for another session until we've got ABC in place. The get people to talk one is people new to running process workshops have said, well, I just had silence at the start. They're waiting for me to tell them, or whatever it might be, and there's a awkwardness at the beginning of the workshops. A really good way, especially if you understand UPN and the methodologies, just to ask someone to talk about what they do day in, day out. Yeah, and what you'll find is they'll start nervously, they'll start talking, they'll warm up, and then what you can do is pull out the verb and noun activities. And then once you start pulling out verb and noun activities and putting those on the screen from what they're saying, it will start to flow and they'll see what they're doing. Colin, who's on the call, always talks about workshop 0. Yeah, there's when it's someone's first process workshop, especially when it's maybe they're new to the methodology, there's just a little learning hump that they have to get over. And once they see what you're doing, brilliant. They'll understand it when they start see you creating detailed views and grouping things and outputs and how it flows. They'll soon get into the swing of it, and you'll be flying in no time. What works well as a question mark in quotes is a reference to, if a lot of people get stuck on you've captured process and it's like a so what, especially if you're trying to get improvement opportunities or risks or whatever. A really great question for people if you're trying to work out what's wrong with something is to ask them what's good with something. Yeah, and it's human nature to start to very quickly move on to, well, what I love about my job is this, that, the other, and the people and the like, but what I find I get frustrated with is X, Y, Z, and it's this it's a psychological trick there. So rather than saying what's wrong with your process, just asking what's right with it, what works well, and you'll soon uncover what you need to as a project. So my all-time top 2 tips, and I'm then more happy to open it up to you guys, see if you've got anything I've missed. I'm sure I have. Is just to get started, and again, it's to start, and it's back to just get people to talk about what they do. Just get started. If you're staring at a blank screen, or you're not quite sure what the scope is, or whatever it might be, actually just get started, and it'll flow from there. It'll all become obvious, and then don't try to map the perfect processes. The amount of time I was seeing people, myself included, in the early years, just trying to map perfect processes when that's not reality. You might end up with a perfect process mapped, but it won't resemble any relevance, and people won't get bought in and the like. So they're my top 2 tips in starting not just workshops but process mapping and the like. That's it. Let's try to whittle down years of experience into a few screens, and I'm sure I've probably missed a few, which I'll think about after the session. But hopefully that's been useful. Any questions, any comments, anything I've missed? Challenge me on any of these, or a bit more detail on any of these?
Well, very, very good insights. And if there's one that I would add is when I map processes, usually, Score asks about the activity, what happens, and then the role, who does it. And one of my trick is to do it in two separate run. So first, I've really focused on what happens, so mapping the process without thinking too much about the roles, because it creates very often it distracts the conversation. And then once all the what are mapped, then we start again from the beginning and we start adding the roles. So the two conversations are really separated.
I think the 5 steps, that is so crucial. Doing it in sequence, ring fencing them. There's a massive benefit of that.
Yeah.
Steve, your hands up.
Yeah. One of the things I've kind of missed before, particularly when you're starting mapping processes with various teams, is it's very easy to assume that people running the process know each other and have worked with each other, but quite often, that may not be the case. So I think it needs a bit of careful management, because you don't want endless sort of talking and introductions, but just make sure people have met, and if they haven't, allow quick introductions and to explain what part they're playing in the process.
Definitely. I think that front bit, yeah, exactly. If it's the first time this group's got together, then they make an assumption that they know each other and specialities. That's perfect. Definitely.